among many other things. The Post's scathing series has spawned editorials across the country suggesting that Dick Cheney ought to be impeached or otherwise forced out of office for the good of the nation. Well, joining me now, one of Dick Cheney's very few remaining defenders, and only a part-time defender at that. He is nationally syndicated columnist and editor-at-large at the National Review Online, Jonah Goldberg. Jonah, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tucker.
So you are one of the very few people with the courage, the moxie, to go into print and say, you know, there is something good about Dick Cheney. Was this a parody, or do you feel this way? And
No,
if you do, good for you. Why are you defending Cheney?
Well, first of all, I've always liked Dick Cheney. I think that he's, you know, as I put it in the piece, you know, everyone on both sides of the aisle, there's a lot of this, you know, sort of talk about how we don't want politicians to go by the polls and who don't put their finger in the wind and go with just whatever the prevailing conventional wisdom is. And yet, Dick Cheney is really the only guy who doesn't bother talking the talk. He just walks the walk. He does not care. And I think it's a sign of character and integrity on his part that he just doesn't care. There are a lot of people out there who worship, you know, the masses. And Dick Cheney doesn't. He cares about history. He cares about the merits of the argument. He probably cares about power quite a bit, too. But he's a serious guy, and the flip side to that is that I'm not sure that's the best thing to have in a vice president. It turns out that there's something to be said for having the only other nationally elected candidate, other than the president himself, be a politician, as it were, care about winning the Oval Office for himself, have some ambition, because that changes the way you operate in that office. And maybe Bush loses a chief of staff in some ways, but having the political part of Cheney's brain more engaged might have helped him a lot.
I think you make a really smart point and get to the root of why Cheney is different from most other vice presidents. He, from day one, never wanted to replace the man he works for, George W. Bush. Does it seem odd to you? Does it seem a sign of Bush's weakness that Cheney is so strong?
I don't know if it's a sign of Bush's weakness. I mean, I think it's probably a weakness that Bush had from the beginning that's become more apparent as his poll numbers have gone down, in that Bush has never, no one has ever gone wrong. You know, no one's ever accused Bush of being overly policy-oriented. You know, I mean, he's not a man for the weeds, and that's allowed Dick Cheney to sort of prosper as a bureaucratic infighter. And I think that's, you know, that is sort of one of Bush's problems, is that he does not care that much about details. He's a moralist, and he sees things through a sort of moral narrative, good guys versus bad guys kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing you can pull off after something like 9/11, but it becomes increasingly difficult when you're in sub-freezing approval rating.
That's right. And I agree with you completely that whenever people say we need a politician who doesn't look at the polls, we need another Harry Truman, they don't know what they're talking about, or they're lying. People want to be pandered to. They want someone to suck up to them. They want a very democratic president, small d democratic. I agree completely.
That's what Michael Bloomberg
I am bothered,
right?
though. That's right. That's exactly right.
He's sucking up to the vanity of the independents.
But does Cheney's secrecy, his penchant for secrecy, I mean, this is a cliche, a stereotype, but it's rooted apparently in truth. The guy really is secretive to a degree we haven't seen in a while. That is, I mean, we do have a right to know what our government is doing, don't we?
Yeah, sure, although I think you would concede, even though you and I disagree about some foreign policy stuff, you and I would agree that there are some things that should be kept secret. We may disagree about what they are. And, you know, but I do think that what Cheney has learned after a lifetime in Washington as a power player is that the person who holds the secrets has power. And he's using that for what I would say are probably what he believes to be certainly good ends. A lot of people disagree on that, but he's trying to do best as he can, and he sees holding on to power as a tool to do that. I think it's got a real counterproductive side to it, because it creates this kind of antibody reaction of such visceral dislike of the guy that it makes his policies that much less effective, because he can't really get everything that he wants that way.
I think you're absolutely right. Why is he so disliked? When you talk to liberals or just even garden variety Democrats and Dick Cheney's name comes up, you're apt to see hyperventilation. People hate Cheney on this visceral level. What is so hateable about Dick Cheney? I
truly have no idea. I like Dick Cheney, love to have a beer with the guy. I think he is a smart, serious man in American life. I think one of the things that bothers them is that he doesn't care. You know, there's nothing, you know, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. It drives stalkers and some hardcore lefties crazy. He just doesn't care what they think about him.
Have you ever seen Dick Cheney give his